by the COVID-19 pandemic and since the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. I signed my first executive order the day I was sworn into office, focusing our efforts around race and social justice. Since then, as a city, we have made record investments to advance equity and justice. Things like $1.5 billion in new affordable housing to build thousands of new units, nearly $100 million on quality preschool and childcare, more than $30 million in our Equitable Development Initiative to invest in community-based organizations that are working to combat displacement, like Africatown, Ethiopian Village, the Filipino Community Center, Chief Seattle Club, and Bird Bar. We've spent $40 million for youth safety and a 7-year commitment for free college and a program to get those students jobs so they can be part of our innovative economy. Our budget makes a lot of hard decisions, but if we want a more equitable city when we recover from this crisis, we must make real our promises to our BIPOC communities. We need deep and lasting investments, and we must empower community to guide those investments. That is why my budget commits an additional $100 million in new spending for Black communities, Indigenous communities, and communities of color. It will invest in building opportunity and an inclusive economy, community wealth building and preserving cultural spaces, community wellness and safety, environmental justice, and a Green New Deal. Building on our current investments in equity, this $100 million investment allows us to invest in more young people, community safety programs, and the next generation of affordable housing in our community. We need to do more of what we've done in the past 3 years, but these decisions must be driven by community needs and priorities and community voices, not by City Hall. It must be community itself that crafts an investment plan to build on the health of community. Community members will guide us to direct these resources where they're needed the most. Investing in community wealth, wellness, and strength is also the path to true community safety. By investing in equitable, healthy, and resilient communities, we reduce the need for emergency 911 responses. Here in Seattle and in cities across the nation, people have spoken out and demanded that we reimagine policing. As U.S. Attorney, I led the investigation of the Seattle Police Department that resulted in the consent decree. That work created some of the nation's leading policies on policing. It also allowed the Seattle Police Department to hire the best officers and train them in crisis intervention and de-escalation. And it created robust civilian-led accountability systems so we can hold officers accountable. But reimagining policing is more than just training and policies. We need to rethink how the Seattle Police Department serves our city and address the continued racial disparities in policing. And we need to make further changes to our criminal legal system, like reforming probation and breaking the cycles of incarceration. We need more programs to prevent violence, alternatives to incarceration, and a community court. We also need to shift many of the 800,000 calls for help from armed police officers to other community-based programs. Too often, our officers are responding to other failures, the failures in the foster care system, our behavioral health system, our homelessness system, and our education system. Those aren't problems officers should have to address. Often, 911 calls require a fast police response, and Seattle needs a strong, well-trained, and community-based department for those calls. There is a need and strong support for our officers in this city. But nonviolent calls don't always need an officer with a gun. Someone in crisis may need a social worker, a nurse, a crisis counselor, or an unarmed community service officer. So reimagining policing will be fundamentally changing the role of traditional police in our community and their interactions with our community, especially communities of color. It will mean growing existing programs like nurses in our schools and in our homeless shelters, mental health professionals at our police precincts, trusted messengers for our youth and communities. and our successful Health One program, where we respond to non-emergency calls for people in crisis with specially trained social workers and firefighters. We're already doing it here downtown, and in this budget, we'll expand it to both South Seattle and communities in North Seattle, including Ballard and the University District. These programs ultimately must be part of a new model for community safety throughout Seattle. And if we get this right, we will not only reduce 911 calls that require an armed Seattle police officer, we can increase health and reduce harm. But these decisions can't be decided by bumper stickers and slogans or arbitrary numbers. They must be founded on facts and a real plan. They must parallel building better community wellness and health. They must parallel the investments we need to make in community. We need more affordable low-income and middle-income housing because our region's skyrocketing costs and rents have displaced far too many individuals and families. Our communities of color have particularly been impacted by these challenges. We must continue to act urgently to address our homelessness and housing crisis. This crisis is decades in the making, but we had begun to see progress on key fronts: housing, shelter, and services. We invested more than $1.5 billion to create nearly 4,500 units of affordable housing, including permanent supportive housing. We nearly doubled 24/7 shelter, including tiny home villages, to move people out of homelessness and into permanent places. We created a new regional homelessness authority to break down silos in our response. We need to tackle this together. But the pandemic has created new challenges for our homelessness response. There are more individuals without access to hygiene services, with libraries and businesses closed. Many vulnerable individuals at the highest risk for COVID-19 live at our shelters, permanent supportive housing, or are living unsheltered. There are more tents and encampments across our city. There are more people at risk for going hungry. In the initial weeks of the pandemic, we worked quickly to bring new shelter capacity online. We created hygiene resources, converted crowded overnight shelters to 24/7 shelters with social distancing measures to slow the spread of COVID-19, and we expanded COVID-19 testing. Our actions have limited outbreaks among individuals experiencing homelessness compared to other major cities. My budget continues to increase our shelter capacity to bring more of our neighbors out of encampments and into permanent housing. It supports more than 2,300 shelter units and adds another 300 units of short-term shelter. In addition, more than 1,000 permanent supportive housing units coming online and thousands of affordable homes. We are also increasing investments in strategies we know work: diversion and rapid rehousing. Seattle cannot and will never solve our affordability, homelessness, and housing crisis if we continue to act alone. These challenges do not know any city boundaries. If we want to truly address housing and homelessness, we must act as a region. So what's next for Seattle in our budget? As happens every year, the members of the City Council will consider my plan. In recent months, we have had policy disagreements about their pledge to cut the police by 50%, the best approach to address encampments, spending of the city's emergency funds, and raising taxes only on Seattle businesses. We may still have policy disagreements in the future, but you expect and deserve your government to work together on the toughest challenges. In this unprecedented moment, you deserve leaders that will work hard to bridge our divides. Listen, there's no greater city. Look around us. This is a time to come together and ensure our city rebuilds from this pandemic a better and more equitable city. We can make big, bold changes together and get through this moment. Because over the last 3 years, our city has led on progressive change. A domestic workers' bill of rights for 30,000 domestic workers, vacating marijuana convictions, a minimum wage for rideshare drivers, sending thousands of Seattle kids to free college, eliminating late fines for libraries, a safe storage lot to keep firearms off the street, a new arena, the Seattle Kraken, and no public funds used. Seattle should be proud of our accomplishments and our determination. We are compassionate, we are resilient, and despite a year of challenges and setbacks, we will do big things and lead the nation. We will get through this together. And I have no doubt that we can meet this unprecedented moment for our city. We will make generational change.
What we really want in Seattle is both a vibrant city and a place that we can really get out and enjoy, like Puget Sound. And so at SPU, what we're really about is protecting people and protecting our waterways.
The city of Seattle owns and manages about 100,000 acres of protected land in the Cascades. This land provides all of the water for the citizens of Seattle. It's this clean, clear, reliable